Nostalgia is easy. It's easy to invoke. It's easy to appreciate. But it's even easier to scorn.
A shadow grows on the wall behind you, swallowing you in darkness. It is almost here.
What is it?
Netflix's summer hit Stranger Things is many things. The title is undoubtedly a tongue-in-cheek misnomer, as there's very little here that is strange. The hype and indeed the resulting series are all too familiar. Before I get into these feelings of mine, I'll be honest, I enjoyed Stranger Things. I speak about it only now because my knee-jerk reaction to the first episode was so negative that I wanted to watch the whole thing and then sit on it for a while. Sure, I appreciated the 80s nostalgia, the totally sincere, imagination-filled characters, the reanimated archetypes, the small-town setting, and that flickering blood-red opening sequence. More than that, however, I appreciated an honest story that was told with heart from start to finish. Nearly all the acclaim for Stranger Things has been about its nostalgia rather than the story it's telling or message it has to impart. This could easily say something about the merits of the show itself, but most concerning is what it says about the audience. To answer this, we must look at how nostalgia is used in Stranger Things and what ends are met by placing its story in that particular time. In other words, could this story have been told in modern times, and would it be to its benefit, or would the show suffer? Stranger Things' fictional town of Hawkins, Indiana, captures countless little details that make it a wonderland of nostalgia. It's a town where kids can bike home fearlessly, teenagers vandalize property without reprimand, big box stores are locally owned, and law enforcement knows everyone by name. Children play board games in their parents' basements. Big sisters tie up phone lines. The first episode alone, almost by necessity, throws these scenes at you for a reason. It wants you to relate, or more accurately, to yearn. The immediate conclusion is that this is a simpler time and place. Problems didn't extend far beyond the reaches of the local police, and of course, when it does, it's up to the bravery of earnest young boys to solve the problem in their own unsupervised way. This is where problems begin. Would this work today?
We have some questions.
A lot of questions. So you know how in Cosmos, Carl Sagan talks about other dimensions, like beyond our world?
Yeah, sure. Theoretically.
Right, theoretically.
So, theoretically, how do we travel there?
You guys have been thinking about Hugh Everett's many worlds interpretation, haven't you?
Modern technology and society makes a lot of the detective work in bike riding a moot point, plus the whole idea that kids would freely bike to and from their friends' houses, hide for hours in remote forts, among other things, is unrealistic on two levels. One, most of us would probably deem this unbelievable in the real world, and two, I can't see a film or TV writer applying these kinds of characters to a modern story. In a period piece, a time is recreated for the purposes of telling a story relevant to its time, though more often than not, this is limited to either classic works or original stories that could conceivably take place against the backdrop of a given time. For example, you wouldn't expect to see a classic film noir gangster in a modern thriller, even though both of them involve crime. The behaviors, actions, and reactions of a character can thus be restricted to a time period. This isn't bad on its own, but it only weakens the case for this nostalgia overload. With Stranger Things, we see a setting that is resurrected for the sake of telling a mostly unoriginal story. It's not an event that could only happen at that time, but a format. Contrast this with another 80s theme show currently running by the name of Halt and Catch Fire. It too is shameless about its 80s indulgence, but it uses the time period to craft a piece of historical fiction that has seldom been broached in cable television. It's not telling a story that has already been told, nor is it limiting its character archetypes to those of the time. If Halt and Catch Fire is a modern recreation, Stranger Things is a studious dissection that not only recreates the feel of an 80s film, but of the production techniques, the acting, the cinematography, and the story. It is such a thorough emulation that style over substance criticisms have seemingly gone unheard. But going back to the idea that this show is a simpler time, who is best suited to make that claim? I hate to use the word, but millennials have only for the most part had an aftertaste of the era. As one myself, I was in no way cognizant of the world for any of the 80s, and by the time I was, the movies that epitomized that era were already collecting dust on a shelf in VHS format. Perhaps for my demographic at least, It captures a time that we saw as close to our own, but somehow just out of reach. For older generations, I can only guess. Nostalgia on this level is simply uncomfortable. It's one thing to be inspired and even derivative in crafting a story. It's another to sugarcoat it in the glosses of its predecessors in order to peddle it successfully. It's akin to tracing an illustration, perfecting each line until it's committed to memory. That's not to downplay the effort that went into making this show. Faithfully recreating something in practically any field can be a Herculean effort. In a way, you must reverse engineer a dead art form. And for that, I can respect it. This danger of nostalgia lies not in a single TV series, but in the seemingly endless wash of media throwbacks. When you have TV series, more music than I know how to name, and even fucking drinks that recollect a certain era, the question really becomes, what is the end game here? This isn't to say exciting new things aren't happening in all those fields, but nostalgia to this frequency has become a distraction, and with a show like Stranger Things, we have finally come full circle. And that is my Spontification.